Mary Chen stood in the sterile conference room of the Hartwell Industries building in downtown Seattle, her hands trembling as she stared at the legal documents spread across the mahogany table. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and white. The weather matched her internal chaos, cold, relentless, and impossible to escape. Her husband of 5 years, Chris Bennett, sat beside her with an expression she had never seen before. Cold calculation, mixed with barely concealed relief. "Just sign the papers, Mary," Chris said, his voice devoid of the warmth she once thought defined their marriage. "This is better for everyone. Better for everyone." The words echoed in her mind like a cruel joke. 3 months ago, after their latest failed fertility treatment, Chris had started pulling away. The man who once promised to love her through anything had transformed into a stranger who flinched when she entered a room. Then came the medical results, the ones that confirmed what 5 years of trying had suggested. Mary's fallopian tubes were severely damaged from an untreated infection in her early 20s, making natural conception nearly impossible. The diagnosis had devastated her, but Chris's reaction had shattered her completely. "Mr. Hartwell is offering a very generous arrangement," the attorney said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Full debt forgiveness for Mr. Bennett's gambling obligations, plus a substantial finder's fee. In exchange, Mrs. Bennett will enter into a contracted marriage with Mr. Alexander Hartwell for a minimum period of 2 years. Mary's stomach churned. A contracted marriage. The clinical term made her feel like property being transferred from one owner to another. She looked at Chris, searching for any sign of the man who had once brought her flowers every Friday, who had held her through her mother's funeral, who had whispered promises of forever against her hair. That man was gone, replaced by someone who had accumulated $200,000 in gambling debts and saw his infertile wife as a convenient bargaining chip. "What about what I want?" Mary whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Chris finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. "You're the reason we can't have kids, Mary. You're broken. At least this way, you're useful for something." The cruelty in his tone was surgical, designed to cut deep. "Besides, you don't have a choice. If I don't pay back these people, they'll kill me. Is that what you want? Your husband dead because you're too selfish to help?" The manipulation was expertly crafted. Chris had always been good at twisting situations to make himself the victim. Mary felt the familiar guilt rising in her chest, the same guilt that had kept her silent through his mood swings, his late nights out, his increasingly erratic behavior. But something else rose with it this time. Anger, white-hot and clarifying. Before she could respond, the conference room door opened. Alexander Hartwell entered with the commanding presence of a man accustomed to controlling every room he walked into. At 38, he was 15 years older than Mary, with steel-grey eyes that seemed to assess everything in seconds. His tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than Mary earned in 6 months as a medical transcriptionist. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, strong jawline, and an expression of calculated indifference. He looked exactly like what he was, a tech billionaire who got what he wanted. "Mrs. Bennett," Alexander said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. He didn't acknowledge Chris at all. "I understand this situation is unconventional. I want to make something clear before you sign anything. You will have your own legal representation. You will have your own bank account, fully funded. You will have complete autonomy over your personal decisions. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I need a wife for social and business purposes. Your husband needs debt relief. If you agree, you'll be compensated for your time and trouble. If you don't, you're free to walk out that door." Mary stared at him, trying to process the bizarre situation. "Why me? You could have anyone." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Was it respect? "Because you're in an impossible situation, and I respect people who survive impossible situations. Also, unlike most people in my social circle, you're not interested in my money or status. You just want to escape. I can give you that escape, with conditions that protect both of us." Chris leaned forward eagerly. "She'll sign. We've already discussed this." "I'm speaking to your wife, not you," Alexander said coldly, finally acknowledging Chris with a look of such disdain that Chris actually recoiled. "In fact, once these papers are signed, you'll have no further contact with Mary. That's non-negotiable. The restraining order is already drafted." "A restraining order?" The words should have frightened Mary, but instead they felt like oxygen to drowning lungs. No more of Chris's blame, his manipulation, his carefully crafted punishments for her biological failures. The attorney slid a second folder across the table, her copy of the contract, she realized, marked with tabs for her signature. She opened it with shaking hands and began to read. The terms were staggering. Immediate payment of Chris's debts in exchange for a divorce, finalized within 30 days. Mary would then marry Alexander in a private civil ceremony. She would live in his residence, attend necessary social functions, and maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. In exchange, she would receive a monthly allowance of $10,000, full health insurance including unlimited fertility treatments if she desired them, and a lump sum payment of $5 million at the end of the 2-year contract. If Alexander terminated the contract early, the payment would double. If Mary terminated it, she would still receive $2 million plus all allowances accrued. "This is insane," Mary breathed, reading the numbers again to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. "It's business," Alexander corrected. "I need stability and respectability for an upcoming merger with a very traditional Japanese firm. They value family and commitment. A wife who isn't interested in my money, who has her own quiet dignity, serves that purpose. You need freedom and financial security. We can help each other." Mary looked at Chris one more time. Her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, was practically salivating over the documents, already mentally spending his freedom from debt. He had sold her, actually sold her like she was an object with a price tag. The betrayal crystallized into something hard and unbreakable in her chest. If she was going to be treated like a commodity anyway, at least she could choose the terms. She picked up the pen and signed her name on every marked line. The motion felt both terrifying and liberating. With each signature, she was erasing 5 years of her life and stepping into an unknown future with a man she didn't know. But that unknown future included freedom from Chris, financial security, and the strange, unexpected offer of autonomy from a billionaire who supposedly needed nothing from her but appearances. "It's done," the attorney confirmed, gathering the documents efficiently. "Mr. Bennett, you'll receive confirmation of debt payment within 2 hours. The divorce petition will be filed tomorrow morning. Mrs. Bennett, you have 48 hours to collect your personal belongings from your current residence, accompanied by security if you wish. Mr. Hartwell's driver will take you to a hotel tonight. Expenses covered." Chris stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. For a moment, Mary thought he might actually thank her, might show some shred of remorse for what he'd done. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and walked out without a word, leaving her sitting across from a stranger who now owned the next 2 years of her life. Alexander waited until the door closed before speaking. "I know this is overwhelming. Take tonight to process everything. Tomorrow we'll discuss logistics. You'll have your own suite in my home, complete privacy. I travel frequently for business, so you'll often have the place to yourself. This doesn't have to be a prison sentence, Mary. It's a transaction, and I always make sure both parties benefit from my transactions." Mary nodded numbly, unable to form words. She had just agreed to marry a billionaire she'd met 10 minutes ago to escape a husband who had sold her to pay his gambling debts. The absurdity of it would have made her laugh if she weren't so close to tears. Alexander stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "your ex-husband is a fool. Infertility doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. Don't let his cruelty define how you see yourself." Then he was gone, leaving Mary alone in the conference room with the rain and her shattered life. She sat there for a long time, watching the water stream down the windows, feeling like she was drowning and being saved at the same time. Somewhere in the building below, Chris was celebrating his freedom from debt and from her. Somewhere else, Alexander Hartwell was probably already moving on to his next business deal, having acquired a wife as easily as he might acquire a company. And Mary sat in the middle, a woman who had just sold herself for freedom, wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life or the first truly brave decision. The hotel Alexander's driver took Mary to wasn't just nice. It was the kind of luxury she had only seen in magazines. The Four Seasons overlooked Elliott Bay, with a view that made Seattle's skyline look like a postcard. The suite was twice the size of the apartment she had shared with Chris, with a king bed covered in Egyptian cotton sheets, a marble bathroom with a soaking tub, and a sitting area with floor-to-ceiling windows. Mary stood in the middle of it all, still wearing the same jeans and sweater she'd thrown on that morning, feeling completely disconnected from reality. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Alexander. The driver will collect you at 10 tomorrow morning to retrieve your belongings. Security will accompany you. Take only what's personally meaningful. Everything else will be replaced. Sleep well." Mary stared at the message. Everything else will be replaced. As if her entire life could be upgraded like a hotel room. She wanted to be angry about the presumption, but exhaustion won out. She ordered room service, a burger and fries because she'd barely eaten all day, and then stood in the shower for 30 minutes, letting the hot water wash away the stale scent of the conference room and Chris's final words. "You're broken." The words kept echoing. She had heard variations of them for months, each fertility appointment seeming to confirm Chris's assessment. Every negative pregnancy test had felt like another piece of evidence of her inadequacy. She had internalized his disappointment until it became her own identity. But Alexander's words cut through that narrative like a knife. Infertility doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. Mary fell asleep in the enormous bed, wrapped in a hotel robe, her wet hair soaking the pillow. She dreamed of signing endless documents while rain poured through the ceiling, and Chris counted money that turned to ash in his hands. The next morning arrived with brilliant sunshine, as if Seattle itself was mocking yesterday's storm. Mary dressed in the same clothes, she had nothing else, and met the driver in the lobby at exactly 10. The security guard was a tall woman named Carmen, with kind eyes and an efficient manner. They drove to the small house in Ballard that Mary had called home for 5 years, and the sight of it made her chest tighten with complicated emotions. Chris's truck was gone. Good. Mary had been dreading a confrontation, but apparently he couldn't even be bothered to face her one last time. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, Carmen following at a respectful distance. The house looked the same worn couch, same dishes in the sink, same photos on the walls that now felt like evidence of a life that never really existed. How many of those smiles had been real? Mary worked methodically, packing only what mattered. Clothes, books, her grandmother's jewelry box, the quilt her mother had made before she died. She left the photos on the walls. She left the kitchen items they'd received as wedding gifts. She left everything that belonged to the fantasy of who she thought she was supposed to be. It took less than 2 hours to pack up the pieces of herself that felt worth keeping. As she was loading the last box into the SUV, a neighbor appeared. Mrs. Patterson from next door, a 70-year-old busybody who had always been kind to Mary but critical of Chris. "You leaving him, honey?" she asked bluntly. "Yes," Mary said simply. Mrs. Patterson nodded with satisfaction. "About damn time. I heard him on the phone last week, bragging to someone about getting rid of his defective wife for a big payout. Nearly marched over here to give him a piece of my mind, but figured you'd handle it your own way." She paused, then added, "You deserve better than that boy always did." Mary hugged her, surprised by the sudden tears. "Thank you for saying that." "You go be happy wherever you're going," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, "and don't you dare look back." The drive to Mercer Island took 20 minutes through downtown Seattle and across the I-90 bridge. Mary watched the city recede behind her, replaced by the tree-lined streets and waterfront estates of one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Washington. The houses here weren't just big, they were architectural statements, each one trying to outdo the next in glass, steel, and carefully landscaped perfection. Alexander's house, no, mansion was the accurate word, sat on 2 acres of waterfront property with views of Lake Washington and the Cascade Mountains beyond. The modern design featured clean lines, massive windows, and natural wood accents that somehow made the enormous structure feel almost warm. The driver pulled into a circular driveway made of pale stone, and Mary's breath caught. This was going to be her home. The thought felt impossible. Alexander himself met her at the door, dressed more casually than yesterday in dark jeans and a grey Henley that made him look younger and somehow more intimidating. Without the armor of a business suit, his physical presence was more obvious. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of controlled strength that came from disciplined exercise. His grey eyes assessed her quickly, noting her rumpled clothes and tired face. "Welcome," he said simply. "Let me show you around." The interior was as stunning as the exterior. Soaring ceilings, polished concrete floors, softened with expensive rugs, furniture that managed to be both modern and comfortable. The main floor held a professional-grade kitchen that opened to a living area with a fireplace and those omnipresent massive windows. The art on the walls was museum quality. Mary recognized a Rothko in the dining room that was probably worth more than Chris's entire debt. Alexander led her upstairs to the east wing. "Your suite," he said, opening double doors to reveal a space that made the Four Seasons room look modest. Bedroom sitting area, walk-in closet already stocked with clothes in her size, and a bathroom that belonged in a spa. Complete privacy. The door locks from the inside. My suite is in the west wing. Shared spaces are the kitchen, living areas, library, gym and pool. There's also a home office you're welcome to use if you need it. Mary walked through the suite in a daze, running her hand along the soft grey duvet, peeking into the closet at designer clothes she would never have bought herself. "How did you know my size?" "I have very competent assistants," Alexander said dryly. "If anything doesn't fit or isn't to your taste, it can be exchanged. Consider this a starting wardrobe. You'll need it for social functions." "Social functions," Mary repeated, the reality of her new role sinking in. What exactly does that mean? Charity galas, business dinners, occasional family events. My mother lives in San Francisco and is extremely persistent about holiday gatherings. You'll need to attend as my wife. Look appropriately happy and make polite conversation. I'll brief you before each event. It's tedious, but manageable." He paused, then added, "I should mention that I told my mother we met through mutual friends and had a whirlwind romance. She's sentimental about that sort of thing. As far as everyone outside my legal team knows, this is a real marriage based on genuine affection." "You want me to lie to your family?" "I want us both to maintain the fiction that serves our purposes," Alexander corrected. "You get to decide how much truth you share with people in your life. I'm simply asking for discretion regarding the business arrangement. If that's not something you can do, we can renegotiate." Mary sat on the edge of the bed, feeling overwhelmed. "Why are you being so reasonable? You could demand anything. I signed the contract." Alexander leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. "Because making you miserable serves no purpose. I need you cooperative, not imprisoned. Mutual benefit, remember? Besides, I have enough people in my life who fear me or want something from me. It might be refreshing to have someone around who does neither." "I don't fear you," Mary said, surprised to realize it was true. He was intimidating, yes, but not frightening. "But I don't understand you either." "That's fine. We have 2 years to figure each other out." He straightened, preparing to leave. "Take today to settle in. Tomorrow we'll go to the courthouse for the formalities. The divorce from Chris should be processed by then. I made sure it was expedited. We'll marry immediately after. My attorney will be there with the marriage contract. Then we'll have dinner with my business partners from Tanaka Industries. Consider it your first official appearance as Mrs. Hartwell." Mrs. Hartwell. The name felt foreign. But then again, Mrs. Bennet had felt foreign too by the end. Maybe she was due for a new identity, even if it was rented for 2 years. After Alexander left, Mary unpacked her few belongings, placing her grandmother's jewelry box on the dresser and her mother's quilt on the armchair by the window. Small pieces of herself in this borrowed life. She spent the rest of the day exploring the house, feeling like a trespasser in a museum. Everything was beautiful and expensive and not hers. That night, she found Alexander in the kitchen cooking. The sight was so unexpected that she stopped in the doorway. A billionaire CEO making pasta from scratch, a glass of red wine on the counter, jazz playing softly from hidden speakers. He looked up, caught her staring, and something almost like amusement crossed his face. "I cook when I need to think," he explained. "There's enough for 2 if you're hungry." They ate at the kitchen island, the conversation stilted but not entirely uncomfortable. Alexander asked about her work as a medical transcriptionist, and she found herself explaining the strange satisfaction of translating doctors' hurried notes into clear medical records. He talked about the Tanaka merger, a complex deal involving AI technology and manufacturing that went mostly over her head, but the effort at normal conversation felt like an olive branch they were both extending. "Why do you really need a wife?" Mary asked suddenly. "The truth, not the business explanation." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in his glass. "The Tanaka family is very traditional. They've passed on 3 previous merger opportunities because they don't trust unmarried CEOs. They believe family stability indicates business stability. My previous engagement ended badly 2 years ago, and it's been held against me since." He met her eyes. I could have married someone from my social circle, someone who understood this world, but they would have wanted more than I'm willing to give. You needed an escape, and you're not interested in changing me or my life. That makes this cleaner. What happened with your engagement? His expression hardened. She was sleeping with my business partner while planning our wedding. I found out 3 days before the ceremony. Lost the fiancé and the business partner in one efficient disaster. I'm sorry, Mary said, and meant it. Betrayal was something she understood intimately now. Don't be. It taught me that mixing real emotions with legal contracts is a mistake I won't repeat. He stood, gathering the plates. Which is why this arrangement works. No false expectations, no messy emotions, just a clean transaction that benefits us both. Mary nodded, but something in his words felt sad rather than reassuring. She helped him clean up. Their movements around the kitchen surprisingly synchronized for two strangers. When she went to bed that night in her palatial suite, she felt the weight of tomorrow pressing down. In less than 24 hours, she would be divorced from Chris and married to Alexander. Her entire life transformed in the span of a courthouse visit. She fell asleep, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake, or if this strange contractual arrangement might actually be the freedom she desperately needed. The King County Courthouse was busy on Friday morning, filled with people navigating the machinery of legal transformation. Divorces, marriages, adoptions, name changes. Mary stood next to Alexander in a private room reserved for expedited cases, wearing one of the designer dresses from her new closet, a simple navy sheath that somehow made her feel both elegant and like she was playing dress-up. Alexander's attorney, Richard Chen, was there with a briefcase full of documents, his efficiency almost comforting in its predictability. The divorce is finalized, Richard confirmed, handing Mary a folder. Mr. Bennett's signature was obtained yesterday. All debts transferred and settled. You're legally single as of this morning. Legally single. 5 years of marriage dissolved in a stack of papers. Mary thought she should feel something more. Grief, relief, anger. But mostly she felt numb. Chris hadn't even shown up, had just signed away their marriage as easily as he'd signed away his debts. Maybe that was its own kind of message about what their relationship had really meant. Are you ready? Alexander asked quietly. He stood next to her in a charcoal suit, looking every inch the powerful CEO, but something in his voice was almost gentle. We can wait if you need more time. Mary shook her head. Let's just get it done. The civil ceremony was brief and clinical, conducted by a judge who had probably performed 100 similar ceremonies that month. Mary repeated words that felt both more and less significant than they had 5 years ago with Chris. Alexander's voice was steady as he made the same vows, his grey eyes never leaving hers. When the judge pronounced them married, Alexander didn't kiss her. They had agreed that particular tradition was unnecessary. Instead, he squeezed her hand once, a gesture that felt more like partnership than romance. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, the judge said with a warm smile, oblivious to the transaction she had just officiated. Mrs. Hartwell. It was official now. Mary signed the marriage certificate with her new name, the letters looking strange and unfamiliar. Mary Chen Hartwell, a woman she didn't know yet, married to a man she barely knew, starting a life that felt more like a role in a play than reality. In the courthouse parking lot, Richard handed her another folder. Your new identification, credit cards, and bank information. The account has been funded with the first month's allowance. Health insurance cards are in there as well, already active. If you need anything, my contact information is on the card. Mary nodded, overwhelmed by the efficiency with which her entire legal identity had been transformed. 2 hours ago, she was Mary Bennett, medical transcriptionist, divorced and broke. Now she was Mary Hartwell, billionaire's wife with a bank account that held more money than she had earned in the past year. The vertigo of it made her grip the folder tighter. We have 3 hours before dinner with Tanaka Industries, Alexander said, checking his watch. That's enough time to go over the basics. They'll expect us to be affectionate and comfortable with each other. We need to make this look natural. They returned to the Mercer Island mansion, and Alexander led her to his home office, a sleek space with built-in bookshelves, a massive desk with multiple monitors, and a leather sofa where he gestured for her to sit. He pulled up photos on a tablet, briefing her with the precision of a military strategist. Hiroshi Tanaka is the founder and chairman, 72 years old, very traditional. He values respect and family. His son, Kenji, is the current CEO, 45, more progressive but still deeply influenced by his father's values. Kenji's wife, Yuki, will likely try to befriend you. She's kind, but observant. If she likes you, it will go a long way with the family. Mary studied the photos, trying to commit faces to memory. What should I talk about? Ask questions about their family, their interests. Yuki is a classical pianist. Hiroshi loves golf. Kenji collects vintage motorcycles. Avoid politics, religion, and anything controversial. Be warm but not overeager. Think of it like a performance where the goal is authentic charm. Authentic charm, Mary repeated. That's a contradiction. Alexander smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face from intimidating to almost handsome. Welcome to my world. Everything is performance. The trick is making people believe the performance is real. They practiced for an hour, Alexander coaching her on handshakes, eye contact, the appropriate level of physical affection between newlyweds. He showed her how to place her hand on his arm naturally, how to lean in during conversation, as if sharing an intimate moment. The choreography of fake love, rehearsed like a dance routine. Mary found herself fascinated by how calculated it all was, how Alexander had turned human connection into a business strategy. One more thing, Alexander said, as they prepared to leave for dinner. They'll ask how we met and why we married so quickly. Our story is that we met at a charity fundraiser 6 months ago, started dating secretly because I wanted to keep my private life private after the last engagement disaster, and decided to elope when we realized we didn't want to wait. Simple, romantic, and believable. 6 months ago, I was still married to Chris, Mary pointed out. They don't know that. As far as anyone outside my legal team knows, your first marriage ended over a year ago. I've made sure the public records reflect that timeline. He caught her expression and added, I told you I'm thorough with my transactions. That includes managing information. The restaurant was canless, perched on a hillside with sweeping views of Lake Union and the city beyond. The kind of place where Mary would never have eaten in her previous life, where the wine list alone probably cost more than her old monthly rent. The Tanaka family was already seated when they arrived, and Mary felt Alexander's hand settle at the small of her back. Warm, possessive, the kind of touch a husband would use to guide his wife. Alexander! Kenji Tanaka stood, shaking hands warmly. And you must be Mary. We've heard so much about you. Mary smiled, channeling every ounce of confidence she didn't feel. All good things, I hope. Yuki Tanaka laughed, a light musical sound. He's been very mysterious about you, actually. We were starting to think you were imaginary. It's wonderful to finally meet the woman who captured Alexander's heart. They settled into dinner, and Mary found herself falling into the rhythm Alexander had coached. She asked Yuki about her piano performances, listened attentively to Hiroshi's stories about his grandchildren, expressed genuine interest in Kenji's motorcycle collection. The questions came naturally because she was actually curious. These were interesting people leading fascinating lives. The lies came harder, but she managed them. Yes, they had fallen in love quickly. Yes, she was adjusting to her new life. Yes, Alexander was wonderfully attentive. Alexander played his part perfectly, touching her hand during conversation, refilling her water glass, sharing small smiles that suggested private jokes. To anyone watching, they were exactly what they appeared to be, newlyweds in the honeymoon phase, comfortable and affectionate. The performance was flawless. Halfway through dinner, Yuki leaned toward Mary during a lull in conversation. Can I ask you something personal? Mary's heart jumped, but she kept her expression open. Of course. Do you want children? Yuki asked softly. I know it's an impolite question, especially so soon, but Hiroshi is very focused on legacy and family lines. It would ease his concerns about the merger if he knew Alexander was planning to build a family. The question hit like a physical blow. Mary felt her smile freeze, felt the familiar shame rising in her throat. Before she could formulate an answer, Alexander's hand covered hers on the table, squeezing gently. We're taking that question day by day, he said smoothly, his tone both warm and firm. Mary has some medical considerations we're working through with specialists. If children are in our future, wonderful. If not, we're building a beautiful life together either way. Family isn't defined only by children, as I'm sure you understand. Yuki's expression softened immediately. Of course. I apologize for the intrusion. My mother-in-law has made me too focused on these things. She smiled at Mary. Alexander is right. Family is what you make it. Mary managed a grateful smile, but inside she was reeling. Alexander had just defended her, had refused to let her infertility be a source of shame, had shut down the question without making her feel broken. It was the opposite of every conversation she'd had with Chris on the subject. The unexpected kindness made her throat tight with emotion. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of conversation and carefully crafted smiles. By the time dessert arrived, Hiroshi was laughing at Alexander's stories, and Kenji was discussing merger timelines with enthusiasm. The performance had worked. As they said goodbye in the parking lot, Hiroshi pulled Alexander aside and spoke in rapid Japanese. Alexander responded in the same language, his fluency surprising Mary. Hiroshi looked at Mary, then nodded with what seemed like approval. In the car ride home, Mary finally asked, "What did he say?" "That you're good for me. That I seem more grounded than the last time we met. That a man with a wife who looks at him the way you do is a man who can be trusted with business." Alexander's voice was neutral, but something flickered in his expression. "You did well tonight." "I'm not sure how I looked at you," Mary said quietly. "I was just trying to survive. You looked grateful when I defended you about the children question. It came across as love." He pulled into the driveway, turning off the engine. "For what it's worth, I meant what I said. Your medical situation doesn't define your worth. Don't let anyone make you feel like it does." They walked into the house together, the evening's performance finally over. Mary kicked off the uncomfortable heels and felt the tension drain from her shoulders. Her first day as Mrs. Alexander Hartwell was complete. She had survived the courthouse, the dinner, the lies and half-truths that would define the next 2 years of her life. "Thank you," she said as Alexander headed toward his wing of the house. "For what you said to Yuki, you didn't have to do that." He paused, looking back at her. "Yes, I did. We're partners in this arrangement, Mary. I protect my partners. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be less formal, but there will be more adjustments to make." Mary watched him disappear down the hallway, then climbed the stairs to her suite. She changed into pajamas, washed off the makeup and stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. Mary Chen Hartwell, married to a stranger, playing a role in a transaction disguised as a love story. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel broken. She felt something stranger and more complicated, protected. It wasn't love, wasn't even friendship yet, but it was more than she'd had with Chris by the end. And maybe, in this strange new life, that was enough to start with. 3 days after the courthouse wedding, Mary woke up feeling different. At first, she couldn't identify what had changed. Just a subtle shift in her body, a heightened awareness of sensations. Her breasts felt tender. Her sense of smell was weirdly acute. The coffee Alexander was brewing downstairs hit her nose like a physical force. She lay in bed, mentally cataloguing symptoms and dismissing them as stress, jet lag from the emotional whirlwind, adjustment to her new life. Then came the nausea. Mary barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up, her body rejecting the dinner from the night before with violent efficiency. She knelt on the cold marble floor, trembling and confused. Food poisoning, a stomach bug. She was never sick, but as she rinsed her mouth and stared at herself in the mirror, a different possibility whispered through her mind, one so impossible that she almost laughed at the absurdity. No, absolutely not. The doctors had been clear. Severe tubal damage, multiple failed IVF attempts, less than a 5% chance of natural conception. She was infertile. That diagnosis had defined the last 2 years of her marriage to Chris, had been the catalyst for everything that followed. There was no way she could be pregnant. Especially not now, not 3 days into a fake marriage with a man she barely knew. But the thought wouldn't leave. Mary spent the morning in her suite, researching symptoms on her phone with increasing anxiety. Tender breasts, heightened sense of smell, morning nausea, fatigue, all early pregnancy signs, all also symptoms of stress, hormonal changes, a dozen other explanations that made more sense than the impossible. She tried to push it aside, to focus on the tasks Alexander had given her, reviewing information about an upcoming charity gala, familiarizing herself with his business portfolio, settling into her new role. By afternoon, the not knowing became unbearable. Mary drove to a drugstore in Bellevue, 20 minutes from Mercer Island, where no one would recognize her. She bought 4 different pregnancy tests, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, like she was committing a crime. Back at the mansion, she locked herself in her bathroom and took all 4 tests with shaking hands. Then she waited. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. Mary paced the bathroom, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was impossible, the doctors had said. Chris had believed. She had internalized the diagnosis as unchangeable fact. But when she finally forced herself to look at the tests lined up on the counter, all 4 showed the same result. Pregnant. Mary's legs gave out. She sat on the bathroom floor staring at the positive tests, her mind completely blank. Pregnant. After 2 years of trying with Chris, after countless fertility treatments and crushing disappointments, after accepting that motherhood wasn't in her future, now, somehow, impossibly, she was pregnant. 3 days after marrying Alexander Hartwell in a business arrangement that explicitly didn't include children or real intimacy, the timing was insane. The last time she and Chris had been intimate was over a month ago, one final, desperate attempt before he'd started pulling away completely. Could that be it? Could she have conceived right before everything fell apart? The math worked barely. She was probably 4 or 5 weeks along, which meant conception would have happened in early September, right around their last anniversary attempt. Mary started laughing, then crying, then laughing again, until she couldn't tell which emotion was winning. Of all the times, of all the impossible circumstances, she was pregnant with her ex-husband's child while married to a billionaire who had specifically said he wanted no emotional complications. This was a disaster. This would violate the contract. Alexander could terminate the arrangement, and she'd be left with nothing except a pregnancy she'd wanted for years, but under circumstances that couldn't be worse. She needed to tell Alexander. The thought made her want to throw up again, but hiding it wasn't an option. He deserved to know, and she needed to understand what this meant for their arrangement. Mary stood, washed her face, and tried to compose herself. She found Alexander in his office, focused on multiple computer screens, his expression intense with concentration. He looked up when she knocked, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "Are you okay? You look pale." Mary closed the door behind her and sat in the chair across from his desk, gripping the positive pregnancy test like a lifeline. "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how you're going to react." Alexander's attention sharpened. "What happened?" "I'm pregnant." The words came out flat, almost emotionless. "I took 4 tests this morning. They're all positive. I don't know how it happened. The doctors said natural conception was nearly impossible for me. But it must have been right before Chris and I split up, right before everything fell apart. I'm probably about 4 or 5 weeks along." The silence that followed felt eternal. Alexander stared at her, his expression unreadable, processing the information with the same analytical focus he probably used for business deals. Mary braced herself for anger, for accusations, for immediate termination of their contract. Instead, Alexander leaned back in his chair and said something completely unexpected. "That explains the nausea this morning. I heard you in the bathroom." Mary blinked. "That's your response. I just told you I'm pregnant with my ex-husband's child 3 days into our marriage contract, and you're commenting on my morning sickness. What would you like me to say?" Alexander asked calmly. "That this complicates things? Obviously. That it changes the arrangement? Probably. But you're clearly terrified, and me reacting with anger serves no purpose. Let's discuss this rationally." Rationally. Of course he would want to approach an emotional catastrophe with logic. Mary took a shaky breath. "The contract says I have autonomy over personal decisions. I'm keeping the baby. That's non-negotiable. I know it changes everything, and I understand if you want to terminate the arrangement. I'll give back the money, figure something else out. But I'm not ending this pregnancy." Alexander's expression softened slightly. "I didn't ask you to, and I'm not terminating anything." He stood, pacing to the window, his back to her. "This is actually solvable. The timeline works. We can tell people the baby is mine. You're 4 or 5 weeks along, which fits within our supposed 6-month relationship. No one will question it." Mary stared at his back, confused. "You want to claim the baby as yours? Why would you do that?" "Because the alternative is explaining that you're carrying your ex-husband's child, which would raise questions about our timeline and credibility. It would undermine everything we're trying to accomplish with Tanaka Industries and damage both our reputations." He turned to face her. "If the baby is legally mine, it actually strengthens our position. The Tanakas value family. Hiroshi will see this as proof of our commitment. It's strategically beneficial. This is my child you're talking about, not a business strategy, Mary said, anger finally breaking through the shock. I know that, Alexander said quietly, but it's also my life and reputation. We can make this work for both of us. You get to have the baby you wanted. I get a family narrative that serves my business needs. The child will have financial security beyond anything you could provide alone. It's a logical solution. Mary wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the flaw in his reasoning. He was offering her exactly what she needed: protection, legitimacy, resources. The fact that it also served his purposes didn't make it less valuable. What happens after the 2 years? When the contract ends? We renegotiate, maybe we extend the arrangement. Maybe we divorce and share custody of a child we've both been raising. We'll figure it out when we get there. Alexander returned to his desk, his expression back to business mode. For now you need to see a doctor, get prenatal care established. I'll arrange for the best obstetrician in Seattle. We'll announce the pregnancy publicly in a few weeks, once you're past the first trimester and the risk of miscarriage drops. You've got this all planned out already, Mary said, somewhere between impressed and unsettled. That's what I do. I plan for contingencies. He met her eyes directly. Mary, I know this isn't how you wanted this to happen. I know you wanted this child with someone who loved you, in a real marriage, under normal circumstances. I'm sorry you're not getting that. But I can give you safety, resources, and support. That's worth something. It was worth everything, actually. Mary nodded slowly, letting the reality settle. She was going to have a baby. Alexander was going to help her raise it, at least for the next 2 years. This bizarre contractual arrangement had just become infinitely more complicated and strangely more real. Thank you, she whispered, for not making me feel like this is a disaster. It's not a disaster, Alexander said firmly. It's just a new variable. We'll adapt. Over the next week, they did exactly that. Alexander scheduled an appointment with Dr. Sarah Lynn, one of Seattle's top maternal-fetal medicine specialists. The ultrasound confirmed what the tests had shown. Mary was 5 weeks pregnant, with a strong heartbeat and normal development. Dr. Lynn prescribed prenatal vitamins, reviewed dietary guidelines, and scheduled regular follow-ups. She didn't ask questions about the timeline or circumstances, just treated Mary with professional kindness that made her want to cry with relief. Alexander attended the appointment, taking notes on his phone like he was in a business meeting, asking clinical questions about development milestones and potential complications. Dr. Lynn seemed charmed by his attention, commenting on how wonderful it was to see such an involved father-to-be. The irony wasn't lost on Mary. The fake husband was more engaged in her pregnancy than her real husband had ever been during their fertility struggles. As they drove home from the appointment, Mary felt something unexpected: gratitude. This situation was bizarre and complicated, but Alexander had turned a potential catastrophe into a workable solution. He had given her the space to be happy about the pregnancy, without judgment or resentment. It was more than she ever got from Chris. "Can I ask you something?" Mary said, as they crossed the I-90 bridge back to Mercer Island. "Of course. Do you actually want kids, or is this just another strategic move?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel. "I always thought I'd have children eventually, the traditional path, meet someone, fall in love, build a family. But after my engagement ended, I stopped believing in that fantasy. This wasn't the plan, but it's not unwelcome. I think I could be a good father given the chance. Even to a child that isn't biologically yours. Biology doesn't make a father," Alexander said simply. "Showing up does. If I'm going to claim this child as mine, I'll mean it. I don't do things halfway, Mary. That includes this." They pulled into the driveway, and Mary sat for a moment, processing his words. This strange man who had bought her freedom was now offering to be a father to her child. The situation defied every expectation she'd had about how her life would unfold. But sitting there in the comfortable silence, Mary realized something startling. She trusted him. Against all logic, despite barely knowing him, she trusted Alexander Hartwell to keep his word. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do this together." Alexander nodded, something like respect crossing his features. "Together we'll make it work." And for the first time since seeing those positive tests, Mary believed him. They would make it work. This accidental pregnancy, this contractual marriage, this impossible situation, They would find a way to navigate it together. It wasn't the love story she'd once dreamed of, but it was something else. A partnership built on honesty, mutual benefit, and unexpected trust. For now, that was enough. By the end of October, Mary was 12 weeks pregnant and finally past the highest risk period for miscarriage. Her morning sickness had evolved into an all-day nausea that made eating a strategic challenge, but Dr. Lin assured her it was normal and actually a good sign of strong hormone levels. Mary's body was changing in subtle ways. Her jeans were tighter, her breasts were fuller, and she had an odd new habit of crying at commercials. The pregnancy felt more real every day, and with it came the weight of what they needed to do next. "It's time to announce publicly," Alexander said over breakfast one Saturday morning. He was eating scrambled eggs while Mary nibbled dry toast, the only thing that didn't trigger her nausea. "The Tanaka deal is progressing well, but Hiroshi has been asking personal questions. If we're going to use the pregnancy strategically, we need to control the narrative before someone else does." Mary set down her toast. "How do we announce that we're having a baby to people who barely know we're married?" "Social media first, then a carefully worded press release. My PR team has already drafted options." Alexander pulled up his tablet, showing her several versions of an announcement. They were all warm and professional, striking a balance between personal joy and public information. One version included ultrasound photos. Another featured a photo of them together, Alexander's hand resting protectively on her barely visible bump. "This feels manipulative," Mary admitted, staring at the drafted posts. "It is manipulative," Alexander agreed without apology. "That's how public relations works. We're creating the story we want people to believe. The alternative is letting them create their own story, which will be far less favorable." They settled on a simple announcement, a photo of them together on the mansion's back deck, Lake Washington sparkling behind them, Alexander's arm around her shoulders and his hand on her stomach. The caption read, "We're thrilled to announce that the Hartwell family is growing. Baby Hartwell arriving April 2026. We couldn't be more grateful for this blessing." Alexander posted it simultaneously to his professional social media accounts, which had a combined following of over 2 million people. Within minutes, the responses started flooding in. Congratulations from business associates, heart emojis from strangers, effusive comments from people Mary had never met claiming to be so happy for them. The performance had officially gone public. Alexander's mother called 30 seconds after the post went live. Mary could hear her excited voice through the phone as Alexander held it slightly away from his ear. "Mom, yes, it's real. Yes, we're very happy. No, we're not finding out the gender yet. I'll call you later with details." He hung up with a long, suffering expression that was almost endearing. "She's booking a flight to Seattle as we speak. Prepare yourself. My mother is a force of nature." The press picked up the story within hours. Tech billionaire Alexander Hartwell, expecting first child with new wife Mary Chen Hartwell, appeared on business news sites and celebrity gossip blogs alike. Photos from their wedding at Canlis somehow materialized. Alexander's PR team must have planted them. The narrative being built was picture perfect. Whirlwind romance, quick marriage, immediate pregnancy, a love story for the modern age. Mary read the articles with a strange sense of detachment. They were writing about her life, but none of it was real. The Mary in these stories was confident, radiant, madly in love. The real Mary was nauseated, overwhelmed, and living in a house with a man she barely knew who was pretending to be her baby's father. The disconnect between public perception and private reality felt like living in two different worlds simultaneously. The Tanaka family sent a beautiful congratulations gift, a handcrafted wooden baby cradle from Japan with intricate cherry blossom carvings. Yuki called personally to express her joy and offer advice about pregnancy and motherhood. "Hiroshi is very pleased," she confided to Mary during the call. "He sees this as confirmation that Alexander is serious about building legacy. It's good for the partnership." Everything was good for the partnership. That was the point. Mary was growing a human being inside her body, and the primary value people saw in it was how it affected business deals and public perception. The commodification of her pregnancy should have made her angry, but mostly it just made her tired. This was the world she'd agreed to enter when she signed that contract. Alexander's mother, Patricia Hartwell, arrived 3 days later like an elegant hurricane. She was in her mid-60s, impeccably dressed in designer clothes with silver hair styled in a classic bob, and Alexander's grey eyes that seemed to see everything. She swept into the mansion, hugged her son, then turned to Mary with an assessing gaze that felt like being examined under a microscope. "So you're the woman who finally got my son to settle down," Patricia said, then pulled Mary into a surprisingly warm hug. "I'm so glad he found you, dear. And a baby on the way. I'd almost given up hope of being a grandmother." Mary found herself liking Patricia despite the circumstances. She was warm, funny, and genuinely excited about the pregnancy in a way that felt real rather than performative. Over lunch on the back deck, Patricia told stories about Alexander as a child. Serious, intense, always planning his next move even at age 7. He built a business plan for a lemonade stand that included market analysis and profit projections. Patricia laughed. "I knew then he'd either run a Fortune 500 company or become a supervillain." "The jury's still out," Alexander said dryly, which made his mother swat his arm affectionately. Patricia stayed for 4 days, filling the mansion with energy and maternal fussing. She insisted on taking Mary shopping for maternity clothes, even though Mary wasn't showing yet. They spent an afternoon at high-end boutiques in downtown Seattle, Patricia offering opinions on everything from nursery themes to baby names. It felt surreal, playing the role of beloved daughter-in-law while knowing the entire relationship was contractual. But Patricia's genuine warmth made it easier to slip into the performance. "Can I give you some advice?" Patricia asked as they had coffee, decaf for Mary, at a cafe overlooking Pike Place Market. "Alexander has walls. He's had them since his engagement ended. He doesn't trust easily and he keeps people at a distance, but I can see he's different with you. Softer, somehow. Don't let him hide behind those walls forever. He needs someone to see him, really see him." Mary nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Patricia thought she was seeing genuine love between them. She thought Mary was the woman who had broken through Alexander's defenses. The guilt of the deception sat heavy in Mary's chest, but she couldn't tell the truth. So she just squeezed Patricia's hand and said, "I'll take care of him." "I know you will, dear. I can tell." After Patricia returned to San Francisco, the mansion felt quieter but not empty. Mary and Alexander had fallen into a routine that was surprisingly comfortable. They ate breakfast together most mornings, discussing their plans for the day. He worked from home several days a week now, claiming he wanted to be available if Mary needed anything. She had started working remotely as a medical transcriptionist again. Alexander had helped her negotiate better rates with several hospitals, leveraging connections she would never have had on her own. Evenings they often cooked together, the kitchen becoming a neutral space where conversation flowed more easily. Alexander taught her to make pasta from scratch. Mary introduced him to her grandmother's Chinese recipes, dumplings and stir-fries that filled the house with familiar scents. They watched documentaries, argued about politics, discovered they both loved terrible action movies. It was domestic and strange, and not entirely unpleasant. One night in mid-November, as they cleaned up after dinner, Mary felt the baby move for the first time. It was subtle, a flutter like butterfly wings inside her abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. "What's wrong?" Alexander was at her side immediately, concern sharpening his features. "Nothing's wrong. I felt the baby move. First time." Without thinking, Mary grabbed his hand and placed it on her stomach, hoping he might feel it too. "Wait, maybe it'll happen again." They stood frozen in the kitchen, Alexander's large hand warm against her belly, both of them barely breathing. The moment stretched, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with their contract. Then the flutter came again, stronger this time, and Alexander's eyes widened. "I felt that," he breathed. "That's incredible." Mary looked up at him, and something shifted in the air between them. For a moment, the performance fell away. They weren't fake spouses maintaining an arrangement. They were two people sharing an extraordinary moment, connected by the life growing between them. Alexander's hand stayed on her stomach, his thumb moving in small circles, his expression unguarded in a way she'd never seen. "This is real," he said softly, almost to himself. "This baby is real." "Yes," Mary whispered. "Very real." They stood like that for a long moment, before Alexander seemed to remember himself. He pulled his hand back, the walls reassembling behind his eyes. "You should rest. Dr. Lin said you need extra sleep in the second trimester." The spell broken, Mary nodded and headed upstairs. But as she lay in bed that night, her hand on her stomach where Alexander's had been, she realized something unsettling. The lines between performance and reality were blurring. She was starting to care about Alexander as more than a business partner. She looked forward to their dinners, their conversations, the small moments of connection that peppered their days. And the way he'd looked at her stomach, the wonder in his eyes. That hadn't been performance, that had been real. It was dangerous, catching feelings in a relationship with an expiration date. The contract was clear. 2 years. Then they would renegotiate or end the arrangement. Allowing herself to hope for more was setting herself up for heartbreak. But as the baby fluttered inside her again, Mary couldn't quite silence the small voice wondering if maybe, just maybe, this contractual arrangement could become something more. December brought Seattle's typical grey rain and an unexpected complication. Mary was 16 weeks pregnant, firmly in her second trimester when the bleeding started. It was just spotting at first, light pink on the toilet paper that made her heart stop. She called Dr. Lin immediately, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "Come in right away," Dr. Lin said calmly. "It's probably nothing serious, but we should check everything out." Alexander drove her to the medical center with controlled urgency, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Mary sat in the passenger seat, one hand pressed protectively over her stomach, silently pleading with the baby to be okay. She couldn't lose this pregnancy, not after everything. Not after finally getting the child she'd wanted for so long. The ultrasound room was too cold and too bright. Mary lay on the examination table while Dr. Lin moved the wand across her abdomen, studying the screen with professional focus. The silence felt eternal. Then the heartbeat filled the room. Strong, steady, perfect. Mary started crying with relief. "Baby looks great," Dr. Lin assured her, pointing to the screen where their child was moving, oblivious to the terror of the past hour. "Strong heartbeat. Good size for gestational age, no obvious problems. The bleeding is likely from a small subchorionic hematoma, essentially a small blood clot near the placenta. It's common and usually resolves on its own." "Usually?" Alexander asked sharply. He had been standing against the wall, but now he moved closer, his attention laser-focused on the doctor. "In about 90% of cases, yes. We'll monitor it closely. Mary, you'll need to take it easy for the next few weeks. No heavy lifting, reduced stress, plenty of rest. If the bleeding increases or you experience cramping, call me immediately." Dr. Lin printed out several ultrasound photos, including one clear profile shot of the baby. "But honestly, everything looks good. Try not to worry too much. Try not to worry." As if that were possible. Mary clutched the ultrasound photos during the drive home, studying the tiny profile, the curve of the nose, the little fist near the face. This was her baby. Real, alive, dependent on her body to stay safe. The responsibility felt overwhelming. "You need to stop working," Alexander said as they pulled into the driveway. "The stress isn't good for you or the baby." "I'm fine," Mary protested. Dr. Lin said to take it easy, not to stop living. "You're transcribing medical records for 8 hours a day. That's not taking it easy." His tone had the authoritative edge she recognized from business calls. "You don't need the money. The whole point of this arrangement is that you're financially secure. There's no reason to push yourself." Mary wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. "Fine. I'll take a break until after the baby comes." The bleeding stopped after 3 days, and the follow-up ultrasound showed the hematoma was shrinking. But the scare had shifted something in their household. Alexander became almost obsessively protective, checking on Mary constantly, insisting she rest, hovering in a way that was both annoying and touching. He rearranged his schedule to work from home more often, claiming he had flexibility, but Mary suspected he was manufacturing reasons to stay close. "I'm not made of glass," Mary said one afternoon, when Alexander appeared for the 3rd time to ask if she needed anything. "I can walk down the stairs without supervision." "I know that," Alexander said, looking slightly embarrassed. Just after the bleeding I realized how much could go wrong. It made it more real somehow." Mary softened. "It scared me too, but we can't spend the next 4 months living in fear. The baby's fine, I'm fine, we just have to trust that." But trusting was easier said than done. Mary found herself hyper-aware of every sensation, every twinge, every cramp, every movement or lack thereof. She checked for bleeding constantly, her anxiety a low-grade hum beneath everything else. The joy of pregnancy was tangled with terror of loss. She understood now why people waited until the 2nd trimester to announce. There was so much that could still go wrong. Christmas approached, and Patricia insisted they come to San Francisco for the holiday. "I want my son and my future grandchild here," she said firmly over the phone. No arguments. Besides, Mary should meet the rest of the family. The rest of the family turned out to be Alexander's younger sister, Jennifer, her husband, Mark, and their 2 children, a 7-year-old girl named Sophie and a 5-year-old boy named Luke. They all gathered at Patricia's elegant home in Pacific Heights for Christmas Eve dinner, and Mary was immediately overwhelmed by the warmth and chaos of a real family gathering. Jennifer was nothing like Alexander, outgoing, effusive, quick to laugh and hug. She pulled Mary aside within 10 minutes of meeting her. "I can't believe my brother finally found someone. I was starting to think he'd marry his work and die alone in his pristine mansion surrounded by perfectly organized files." "He's not that bad," Mary said, surprising herself by defending him. "Oh, you're already in deep," Jennifer teased. "That's good. He needs someone who sees past the control freak CEO persona. There's an actual human in there somewhere." Watching Alexander with his niece and nephew was a revelation. He was patient and playful in a way Mary had never seen, building elaborate Lego structures with Sophie and pretending to be a monster for Luke to vanquish. He was going to be a good father, Mary realized. Not just adequate or dutiful, but genuinely good. The thought made her chest tight with complicated emotions. That night, after the children were in bed and the adults were drinking wine, sparkling cider for Mary, by the fireplace, Patricia raised a toast. "To family, to new beginnings, and to the baby who will make me a grandmother. May this next year bring all of us more love and joy than we can imagine." Everyone clinked glasses, and Mary felt the familiar guilt of deception rising. These people genuinely cared about her and the baby. They had welcomed her into their family with open hearts, and it was all built on a lie. She was a temporary fixture, a contracted wife who would probably be gone in 2 years. The thought made her want to cry, so she excused herself to the bathroom and locked herself in until she could compose her face. She found Alexander on the back patio when she emerged, staring out at the San Francisco lights. He looked tired, the polished CEO facade worn thin by family obligations. "You okay?" he asked without turning around. "Your family is wonderful," Mary said, joining him at the railing. "It makes this harder." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about the contract." Mary's heart jumped. "What about it?" The 2-year term seemed reasonable when this was purely business, but now there's a baby involved, a child who will think I'm their father. We can't just dissolve the arrangement when it's convenient and expect that not to cause damage. He finally looked at her, his expression serious. "I think we should consider making this permanent." "Permanent?" Mary repeated, not sure she'd heard correctly. "You mean actually stay married?" "For the child's sake, yes. Stability, consistency, a family structure that doesn't dissolve when a contract expires. It makes sense logically." He paused, then added, "Unless you're planning to go back to Chris or find someone else after the 2 years, in which case we'll figure out shared custody." "I'm not going back to Chris," Mary said emphatically. "Ever. And I'm not thinking about anyone else." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting her. "But what about you? What if you meet someone you actually love? Someone you want a real marriage with?" Alexander's laugh was bitter. "I told you, I don't believe in that fantasy anymore. Love is just brain chemistry and wishful thinking. What we have is more honest, a partnership based on mutual benefit and respect. That's more reliable than romance." Mary wanted to argue that love was more than chemistry, that partnership without affection was just coexistence, but standing there in the cold San Francisco night, she realized she didn't entirely disagree with him. Her marriage to Chris had been built on love, and look how that ended. This arrangement with Alexander, clinical as it started, had given her more security and genuine care than Chris ever had. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's table the 2-year expiration. We'll revisit after the baby comes, see how things are going." Agreed. Alexander's relief was visible. "For now, let's just focus on keeping you and the baby healthy." They returned to Seattle the day after Christmas, and Mary spent the last week of the year nesting, organizing the nursery, washing tiny baby clothes, reading every pregnancy and parenting book she could find. Alexander hired a contractor to convert the spare room next to Mary's suite into a nursery, and they spent hours debating paint colors, furniture styles, and whether dinosaurs or woodland creatures made a better theme. It was domestic and surreal, and surprisingly enjoyable. New Year's Eve arrived quietly. They had been invited to several parties, but Mary was exhausted, and Alexander didn't want to leave her alone, so they stayed home. They made dinner together, shrimp scampi that Mary could actually eat without nausea, and watched the Seattle Space Needle fireworks from the back deck, wrapped in blankets against the cold. As midnight approached, Alexander handed her a glass of sparkling cider. To surviving a very strange year, Mary clinked her glass against his, and to whatever comes next. Whatever comes next, Alexander echoed. The fireworks exploded over the city, gold and silver and blue lighting up the night. Standing there next to Alexander, 6 months pregnant with a baby he was claiming as his own, Mary felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. This wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't a fairy tale or a love story, but it was hers. Strange and complicated and real. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. January brought cold rain and a milestone, the 20-week anatomy scan, where they would learn the baby's gender if they chose. Mary had been ambivalent about finding out. Part of her wanted the surprise, but the practical side knew that planning would be easier with information. Alexander, surprisingly, wanted to know. "I like having all available data," he explained as they drove to Dr. Lin's office. "Besides, my mother has asked me approximately 15 times if we're finding out. I'd like to give her an answer." The anatomy scan was comprehensive, Dr. Lin measuring every part of the baby with meticulous care. Head circumference, femur length, heart chambers, kidney function. Mary watched the screen, amazed by how much the baby had grown. No longer a little bean, but a fully formed tiny human, moving constantly, sucking a thumb, kicking against the confines of her womb. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Lin announced. "All organs developing normally, good growth, strong heartbeat. Do you want to know the sex?" Mary looked at Alexander, who nodded. "Yes," she said, her heart racing. Dr. Lin moved the wand, zooming in on a specific area. "Congratulations, you're having a girl." A girl. Mary started crying immediately, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of emotion. A daughter. She was having a daughter. All those years of trying, all the disappointment and heartbreak, and now she was carrying a baby girl who would be here in less than 4 months. The reality of it crashed over her like a wave. Alexander's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. When she looked at him through her tears, his eyes were bright with emotion too. "A daughter," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice. Wonder, maybe, or the beginning of love for a child he'd never planned for. They drove home in emotional silence, both processing the news. A girl changed things somehow, made the baby more real, more specific. No longer the baby, but our daughter. Mary found herself already imagining the future, teaching her to read, braiding her hair, watching her grow into whoever she was meant to be. "We should celebrate," Alexander said as they pulled into the driveway. "This is a big moment." They ended up at a fancy restaurant in downtown Seattle, the kind of place where Alexander was immediately recognized and given the best table. Over pan-seared salmon and roasted vegetables, they discussed baby names with the seriousness of a business negotiation. "I like traditional names," Alexander said. "Elizabeth, Catherine, Charlotte. Those are all very formal," Mary countered. "What about something softer? Emma, Lily, Grace?" "Emma Hartwell," Alexander tested. "That works. Emma Grace Hartwell." "Or Grace Emma Hartwell," Mary suggested. They went back and forth, testing combinations, vetoing options, slowly narrowing the list. It was oddly intimate, choosing a name together for a child they would raise, even if the circumstances were unconventional. "What about your mother's name?" Alexander asked. "You've mentioned her but never said what she was called." "Catherine," Mary said softly. "With a K. She died when I was 19. Breast cancer." "Catherine Hartwell," Alexander said thoughtfully. "Catherine Emma Hartwell. Katie for short." Mary's throat tightened. Naming her daughter after her mother felt right in a way she couldn't fully explain. "I like that. If you're sure you're okay with it." "It's perfect," Alexander said firmly. "Catherine, it is." They announced the gender to Patricia, Jennifer, and the rest of the family via video call that night, everyone squealing with excitement. Patricia immediately started planning. She wanted to throw a baby shower, and Jennifer was already ordering entirely too many pink outfits online. The family's joy was infectious and genuine, and Mary let herself be swept up in it, pushing aside the guilt about the deception. The Tanaka family sent another beautiful gift when they heard the news, a silk baby blanket embroidered with cherry blossoms and tiny birds. "A daughter is a precious gift," Hiroshi wrote in the accompanying note. "She will bring great joy to your family. The merger is proceeding excellently. Your stability gives us confidence in our partnership's future. Always back to business." But Mary was used to it now, the constant mixing of personal milestones with professional advantages. That was Alexander's world, and by extension hers. She had learned to navigate it, to play the role expected of her, while protecting the parts of herself that remained private. By February, Mary's pregnancy was obvious. Her belly had rounded significantly, pushing against every shirt, making it impossible to hide. She felt enormous and ungainly. Her center of gravity completely shifted. Alexander seemed fascinated by the changes, often catching him staring at her stomach with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something personal?" Mary said one evening as they watched TV together, her feet propped up on the coffee table because everything swelled by evening now. "Of course. Do you ever regret this? The arrangement, the pregnancy, all of it. You didn't sign up for a ready-made family." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I thought I might, honestly. This wasn't the plan. But watching this happen," he gestured to her belly, where Katie was visibly moving, creating waves across Mary's shirt. "It's extraordinary. I get to be part of creating a life. Not many people get that privilege, even if the circumstances are unconventional." "You're going to be a good father," Mary said, meaning it completely. "I hope so." He hesitated, then added, "I'm terrified of screwing it up, honestly. I know how to run a company. I have no idea how to raise a daughter." "No one does until they do it," Mary said. "We'll figure it out together." "Together," Alexander repeated, and the word felt like a promise. The baby shower Patricia organized was held at an upscale Seattle hotel in early March, attended by Patricia, Jennifer, Yuki Tanaka, and about 30 other women from Alexander's social and business circles. Mary felt out of place among the designer dresses and expensive jewelry, but everyone was kind, genuinely excited about Katie's impending arrival. They played the usual games, opened an overwhelming number of gifts, and ate fancy pastries while discussing pregnancy experiences. Yuki pulled Mary aside during a quiet moment. "I'm so happy for you and Alexander. When we first met, I wasn't sure about your relationship. It seemed almost too polished, too perfect. But seeing you now, seeing how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, I know it's real. That baby is going to be so loved." Mary smiled, the deception sitting heavy in her chest. "Thank you. That means a lot." "Hiroshi wants to visit after the baby is born," Yuki continued. "He's very invested in Alexander's family now. The merger will be finalized next month, and he sees your family as part of the partnership's foundation." Everything was proceeding according to Alexander's plan. The fake marriage had served its purpose, providing the stability and family image that secured the deal. Now there was a real baby coming, making the fiction feel more legitimate. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, Mary just felt tired. That night, back at the mansion with enough baby gifts to stock a small store, Mary found Alexander assembling a crib in the nursery. He had refused to let the contractor do it, insisting he wanted to build it himself. He was focused, following instructions with the same intensity he brought to business deals. "Need help?" Mary offered. "I've got it. You should rest. You've had a long day." But Mary stayed anyway, sitting in the rocking chair they'd chosen together, watching him work. The nursery was beautiful, soft grey walls, white furniture, a mural of a forest scene with woodland creatures that a local artist had painted. Everything was ready for Katie's arrival. All that was left was waiting for her to decide she was ready to join them. "Alex," Mary said, using the nickname she'd started using without really thinking about it. He looked up, and she continued, "Thank you for all of this, for giving me a chance to be a mother. I know it wasn't part of your original plan." Alexander set down the screwdriver, his expression serious. "Mary, I need you to understand something. This stopped being just a plan months ago. Katie is my daughter, biology aside. I'm going to love her, protect her, be there for every moment I possibly can. That's not contractual obligation, that's choice." Tears sprang to Mary's eyes. The pregnancy hormones made her cry at everything lately. "I believe you." "Good." He returned to the crib, tightening the final bolt. Because we're in this together now. No matter what happens after the 2 years, Katie will always have both of us. That's not negotiable. Mary nodded, one hand on her belly where Katie was kicking up a storm, as if she could hear them talking about her. 4 more weeks until her due date. 4 more weeks until their lives transformed completely. The waiting felt both endless and terrifyingly short. Mary's water broke at 3 in the morning on April 12th, 2 weeks before her due date. One moment she was sleeping peacefully, the next she was awake and soaked, her heart hammering with adrenaline and panic. She called for Alexander before she'd even fully processed what was happening. He appeared within seconds, taking one look at the situation and immediately shifting into crisis management mode. Okay, this is fine. We've prepared for this. Hospital bag is ready, car is ready. Can you walk? Mary nodded, contractions already starting, mild but unmistakable. This was happening. She was about to have a baby. The reality of it hit her like a physical force. After all the waiting, all the preparation, Katie had decided it was time. The drive to Swedish Medical Center felt both eternal and instantaneous. Mary breathed through contractions while Alexander drove with controlled speed, his jaw tight with concentration. He kept glancing at her, checking that she was okay, one hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze hers. "You've got this," he kept saying. "You're doing great." Labor was brutal. Mary had read all the books, taken the classes, thought she was prepared. But nothing could fully prepare someone for the reality. The pain that came in relentless waves, the exhaustion, the primal intensity of it all. Hours blurred together, measured only by dilation checks and escalating contractions. Alexander stayed by her side the entire time, letting her crush his hand, offering ice chips, whispering encouragement when she was convinced she couldn't continue. "I can't do this," Mary gasped during a particularly brutal contraction, 12 hours into labor. "I can't. It's too much." "Yes, you can," Alexander said firmly, his face close to hers. "You're the strongest person I know, Mary. You survived Chris, survived everything that brought you here, and you're going to survive this too. Katie needs you. I need you. You can do this." His certainty cut through her panic. She nodded, gripping his hand tighter, and pushed through the next wave of pain. 16 hours after her water broke, with one final massive effort, Catherine Emma Hartwell entered the world, screaming her tiny lungs out. Dr. Lynn placed her on Mary's chest, and the world stopped. She was perfect. Tiny, wrinkled, covered in vernix, with a shock of dark hair and furious little fists. Mary stared at her daughter through tears, unable to form coherent words. This was her baby. Real, alive, screaming with indignation at being evicted from her warm cocoon. The love that flooded Mary's system was overwhelming, primal, unlike anything she'd ever experienced. "She's beautiful," Alexander breathed, and when Mary looked up, there were tears on his face too. He reached out tentatively, stroking Katie's tiny hand with one finger. Katie immediately gripped it, her whole fist barely wrapping around his fingertip, and something in Alexander's expression cracked open. "Hi, Katie. I'm your dad." The words made Mary's chest tight. He meant it. This man who had started as a stranger, who had bought her freedom in a business transaction, was claiming this baby as his own, with complete sincerity. Biology didn't matter. Chris's contribution didn't matter. Alexander was Katie's father in every way that counted. They spent the first hours as a family in the hospital room, Mary exhausted but unable to stop staring at Katie, Alexander holding her with the careful precision of someone terrified of breaking something precious. He changed her first diaper, helped with the first attempts at breastfeeding, took approximately 1,000 photos. The performance had become reality somewhere along the way. Patricia arrived the next morning with Jennifer, both of them crying happy tears as they met Katie. "She's perfect," Patricia kept saying, holding her granddaughter with practiced ease. "Oh, Mary, Alexander, she's absolutely perfect. Look at those little fingers. And she has your eyes, Alex." Katie actually had Chris's eyes, dark brown rather than Alexander's grey, but no one knew that except Mary. And it didn't matter. Katie was a Hartwell now, surrounded by family who loved her unconditionally. The Tanaka family sent an enormous flower arrangement and a note congratulating them on their daughter's arrival. The merger had been finalized the previous week, a massive success that would define Alexander's company for years. Mission accomplished. The contracted marriage had served its purpose, delivered even more than originally promised. But sitting there holding Katie while Alexander dozed in the chair next to her hospital bed, Mary couldn't think of any of it as a transaction anymore. This was her life, messy and complicated and unexpectedly beautiful. They brought Katie home 3 days later, to a house filled with flowers, gifts, and an atmosphere of nervous excitement. Mary installed Katie in the bassinet next to her bed, unable to stop checking that she was breathing. New parent paranoia had set in hard. Every sound Katie made sent Mary's heart racing, convinced something was wrong. Alexander was just as bad, appearing every hour to verify Katie was still alive. "We're going to drive ourselves insane," Mary said at 2 in the morning, after both of them had gotten up simultaneously to check on a perfectly sleeping baby. "Probably," Alexander agreed, but neither of them stopped. The first weeks were a blur of exhaustion. Katie needed to eat every 2 hours, which meant no one slept for more than 90-minute stretches. Mary's body ached from labor, her hormones were crashing, and she cried at random intervals for no discernible reason. Alexander hired a night nurse to help, but Mary was too anxious to let anyone else handle Katie for long. This was her baby, the child she'd wanted for years, and she couldn't quite believe she was real. Alexander was surprisingly capable with Katie. He learned to change diapers efficiently, figured out the exact rocking motion that soothed her, took over bottle feeding when Mary needed to sleep. He worked from home almost entirely now, conducting meetings with Katie sleeping against his chest in a carrier. His business partners probably found it amusing, but he didn't seem to care. One evening, when Katie was 3 weeks old, Mary found Alexander in the nursery at midnight, holding a sleeping Katie and just staring at her. The moonlight through the window illuminated them both, this powerful CEO reduced to awe by a 9-pound baby. "Can't put her down?" Mary asked softly from the doorway. "I keep thinking she's going to disappear," Alexander admitted, "that this is all some elaborate dream and I'll wake up back in my empty house, wondering what could have been." He looked at Mary, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I didn't know I could love someone this much. It's terrifying." Mary moved closer, standing next to him, both of them watching Katie sleep. "Welcome to parenthood. Everything is terrifying now." "No regrets?" Alexander asked quietly. "None," Mary said honestly. "You?" "Not a single one." They stood there together in the quiet nursery, a little family built on a foundation of contracts and convenience that had somehow transformed into something real. The 2-year agreement seemed like a lifetime ago, a different reality altogether. Mary couldn't imagine leaving now, couldn't picture a future where Alexander wasn't part of Katie's life, and hers. As if reading her mind, Alexander said, "I want to make this official. Not the contractual marriage, a real one. No expiration date, no transaction, just a family choosing to stay together." Mary's heart jumped. "Are you proposing?" "I'm renegotiating," Alexander said with a slight smile. "Proposing would imply romance and grand gestures. I'm simply pointing out that what we have works. We're good partners, good parents. Katie deserves stability, and He paused, choosing words carefully. "I don't want you to leave, either of you. This is my family now, and I want to keep it." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was practical, logical, quintessentially Alexander. But standing there in the moonlight, watching him hold their daughter with infinite tenderness, Mary realized she didn't need poetry. She needed exactly what he was offering: partnership, commitment, family. "Okay," she said simply. "Let's make it real." Alexander's smile was genuine and warm. "Good. We'll handle the legal paperwork once things settle down. For now, let's just focus on keeping this tiny human alive." Katie chose that moment to wake up, her face scrunching into the pre-cry expression they'd both learned to recognize. Alexander rocked her gently, and Mary moved to help, their movements synchronized from weeks of practice. Together, they changed her, fed her, got her back to sleep. A team, a family, no longer performing, just living. Katie was 6 weeks old when Chris reappeared. Mary hadn't heard from him since signing the divorce papers 9 months earlier. He'd taken his debt forgiveness and disappeared, exactly as expected. She had almost forgotten he existed, her old life with him feeling like something that had happened to a different person entirely. But on a sunny afternoon in late May, while Mary was feeding Katie in the living room, Alexander's phone rang with a call from his attorney. The conversation was brief, Alexander's expression darkening with each second. When he hung up, he was radiating controlled fury. Chris is threatening to contest Katie's paternity. He wants money to stay quiet about the timeline. Mary's blood ran cold. What? He figured out the math. Katie was born April 12th, which means conception was mid-July. We weren't married until October. He's claiming she's biologically his and threatening to go public unless we pay him $5 million. Alexander's jaw was tight. It's extortion. Katie continued nursing, oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated in their lives. Mary stared down at her daughter's peaceful face, fury and fear warring in her chest. He sold me. He traded me to pay his debts. He doesn't get to come back now and claim her. Legally, he might have a case, Alexander said grimly. If he demands a paternity test and it proves he's the biological father, it could complicate custody arrangements. At minimum, it would destroy the narrative we've built, damage the Tanaka relationship, and create a media circus. So we pay him, Mary asked, hating the idea of giving Chris anything. Absolutely not. Extortion only invites more extortion. If we pay now, he'll come back in a year demanding more. Alexander paced, his strategic mind clearly working through options. We need to go on offense. Show that he's not fit to parent, that his claim is purely financial. Document everything. The gambling debts, him selling you, his abandonment of any parental responsibility. They spent the afternoon with attorneys, building a case. The contract Mary had signed included clauses about Chris relinquishing all parental rights in exchange for debt forgiveness. His signature was there, legally binding. The attorneys were confident they could fight any custody claim, but the public revelation of Katie's biological paternity was harder to prevent. We could make a preemptive announcement, Richard Chen suggested. Control the narrative before Chris tries to sell his story to tabloids. Acknowledge that Katie was conceived before your marriage, but emphasize that Alexander is her father in every meaningful sense. Frame it as a love story that started earlier than publicly known. Mary looked at Alexander, trying to gauge his reaction. This would expose their carefully constructed timeline, raise questions about the speed of their relationship. What do you think? I think, Alexander said slowly, that we tell the truth, or most of it. We say that you left an abusive marriage, that we fell in love while you were still processing your divorce, that Katie was conceived during that transitional period. We make Chris the villain he actually is, and emphasize that I'm Katie's father, by choice and legal adoption. It was risky, but it was also the truth, or close enough. Mary nodded. Okay, let's do it. The statement went out that evening through Alexander's PR team, carefully worded to acknowledge the complexity while maintaining dignity. Alexander and Mary Hartwell wished to address speculation regarding their daughter Catherine's paternity. Mary left an abusive marriage in 2025 and met Alexander during that difficult transition. Their relationship developed while Mary's divorce was being finalized, and Catherine was conceived during that time. Alexander has legally adopted Catherine and is her father in every sense that matters. The Hartwells ask for privacy as they protect their family from continued harassment by Mary's ex-husband, who is attempting to extort them financially. The media response was immediate and intense. Some outlets were sympathetic, framing it as a romantic story of finding love after escaping abuse. Others were more salacious, implying scandal and deception. The Hartwell family rallied immediately. Patricia released her own statement expressing unwavering support, and Jennifer went on a minor Twitter crusade, defending her brother and sister-in-law. The Tanaka response was more measured. Kenji called Alexander personally. Mary could only hear one side of the conversation, but Alexander's careful explanations and eventual relieved expression suggested it went better than expected. When he hung up, he looked exhausted. They're satisfied. Hiroshi values honesty about difficult situations over maintaining false perfection. The fact that we're protecting Katie and stood up to extortion actually improved his opinion of us. Alexander sank onto the couch next to Mary, though he did suggest we be more careful about who we trust in the future. Chris's response came through his own attorney, increasingly desperate demands, threats of lawsuits, promises to go to the media with the real story. But he had no leverage. The contract he'd signed was airtight. His abandonment of Mary and Katie was documented, and his gambling problems made him an unsympathetic figure. Within a week, his attorney advised him to accept a settlement. Chris would permanently relinquish all parental rights and sign an NDA. In exchange, his debts would remain paid, and he'd receive $50,000. Enough to disappear, but not enough to enable his gambling. Chris signed. Just like he'd signed away Mary, he signed away Katie without hesitation. The money was apparently sufficient motivation to abandon his biological daughter permanently. Mary felt nothing when Richard confirmed the documents were finalized. Chris was gone from their lives, erased legally and emotionally. Good riddance. But the public revelation had consequences beyond Chris. People who had accepted the perfect love story now looked at Mary and Alexander with questions in their eyes. Was it real? Had it ever been? The speculation was exhausting, but it also forced a different kind of honesty between them. "I need to ask you something," Mary said one night after Katie was asleep. They were on the back deck, the lights of Seattle glittering across the water. "When you said you wanted to make this real, make it official, was that because you actually want a life with me? Or because it's convenient and keeps the family stable?" Alexander was quiet for a long time. 6 months ago, I would have said convenience and stability. That would have been the honest answer. But now? He turned to look at her directly. "I look forward to coming home to you. I like our conversations, our dinners together, the way you laugh at terrible action movies. When Katie smiles, I want you to be the first person I tell. When something goes wrong, you're who I want to talk to. I don't know if that's love. I'm not sure I know what love is anymore, but it's real. Whatever we have, it's real." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "I feel the same way. This wasn't supposed to be real. It was an escape, a transaction, but you became important to me somewhere along the way. You and Katie, you're my family now, not because of a contract, but because I choose it." "So we're in agreement," Alexander said, something like relief crossing his features. "This is real. We're choosing this." "We're choosing this," Mary confirmed. He kissed her then, for the first time since the courthouse wedding. It was tentative, testing, but also warm and genuine. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should probably learn how to do this," Alexander said. "The whole real relationship thing. I'm extremely out of practice." "Me too," Mary admitted. "But we've figured out everything else together. We'll figure this out too." They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, the way people do when they're building something real. They discussed Katie's future, their hopes and fears, what they wanted their family to look like. They acknowledged that what they had wasn't a fairy tale romance, but it was something possibly better, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared commitment, and genuine affection earned through months of navigating an impossible situation together. When Mary finally went to bed that night, to her own suite, they weren't rushing anything, she felt lighter than she had in months. The secrets were out, the threats neutralized, the performance over. What remained was the truth. She was married to a good man who had chosen to be a father to her daughter. They were building a family on their own terms, outside traditional narratives. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Katie started crying through the monitor, and Mary smiled. Their daughter had impeccable timing. She got up to handle the feeding, but Alexander appeared at the nursery door, already reaching for Katie. "I've got this one. You get some sleep." Mary watched him lift Katie with practiced confidence, murmuring softly to her, and felt her heart expand. This was her family. Strange, unconventional, born from a business transaction that became something infinitely more valuable. As she went back to bed, she heard Alexander singing softly to Katie, off-key but sincere, a lullaby about moonlight and dreams. Yes, this was real, and it was exactly what she needed. Epilogue. 1 year later, on a warm May afternoon, the Hartwell family gathered for Katie's first birthday party. The backyard was filled with people. Patricia, Jennifer's family, the Tanakas, colleagues and friends. Katie, wearing a tiny pink dress and a bow that kept slipping off her head, was fascinated by her smash cake, getting frosting everywhere while adults laughed and took photos. Mary stood next to Alexander, his arm around her waist in a gesture that had become natural over the months. They'd moved slowly, carefully, learning how to be partners and then lovers and finally equals in every sense. Mary had moved into his suite 6 months ago, her old rooms converted into a playroom for Katie. They'd renewed their vows in a small private ceremony with just family, replacing the contractual arrangement with real promises made in full sincerity. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Mary asked, watching Katie smear frosting into her hair. "Best year of my life," Alexander said simply, and she knew he meant it. Patricia appeared with her camera, insisting on a family photo. They gathered around Katie, who chose that moment to smash both hands into her cake and squeal with delight. The photo captured them all laughing, messy, imperfect, genuinely happy. Later, after guests had left and Katie was down for her nap, Mary and Alexander sat on the deck watching the sunset. "I've been thinking," Alexander said. "Maybe we should consider giving Katie a sibling, eventually, if you're open to it." Mary looked at him in surprise. "Really? You want more children? Turns out I'm good at being a dad, or at least I'm trying to be. Katie deserves siblings, family, all of it." He squeezed her hand. "Plus, I think we make pretty good kids together, biology aside." Mary laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Let's get through toddlerhood first. Ask me again when Katie is sleeping through the night consistently." "Deal." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade over Lake Washington. A year ago, Mary had been a woman sold by her husband to pay his debts, agreeing to a fake marriage out of desperation. Now she was building a real life with a man who had started as a stranger and became her partner, her co-parent, her love. It wasn't the story she'd imagined, but it was better than anything she could have written herself. Katie's cry came through the monitor, and they both stood automatically. "I'll get her," they said simultaneously, then laughed. Together they went inside, ready for whatever came next. Because that was what family did. They showed up, they chose each other, they built something real from whatever materials they had available, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, the transaction became a love story. Not in spite of the circumstances, but because of them.